First on the agenda is Mr. Cliff Shapard. He's the General Counsel for the Florida Redevelopment Association. He's a principal with the firm of Shepard, Cassidy, and Smith. He's also city attorney for City of Maitland and City of Mount Dora. Any other cities? All right, well, so he knows a little bit about city law. So Cliff, you're up first.
Hey folks, thanks for allowing me to come here. You know, I get a little uneasy when I find out this is the largest crowd ever, but yet only the second time I've had to speak on as an FRA speaker. Is there anybody in the room who's had the pleasure or lack thereof of hearing me speak before? So you drew the short straw this morning. Well, don't give away any jokes because I don't have but a few. Let me first tell you that in my wildest dreams, I would never have expected to be standing here. Now, that's not because I have any problem speaking to people. I've been yelling at teenagers for quite a while. But it's because my predecessor, who some of you I'm sure would have known, is David Cardwell. And seriously for a moment, David Cardwell was the man when it comes to redevelopment. He actually wrote the statute. He knew more about it than anybody, and I'm not him. And when he died unexpectedly this past year, he had listed me as his successor, which is a role that I never aspired to be, but was glad and honored that he thought enough of me to put me in that role. But because I'm not him, I don't have a photographic memory that can cite you every statute and every case and every line. I'm trying to get there, but I have, like you, had to learn a lot of what I know about CRAs and redevelopment law through David, because you see, David helped me set up our first CRA in the city of Maitland many years ago. And what we did there has been the model for what I know. So at least I had a good mentor. So I would tell you that when you are replacing a guy like David Cardwell, it's like trying to remember who took right field after Hank Aaron retired. I don't know, but I know it's me here. So if you're wondering as this presentation goes along why I may seem more tentative than David would have, just kind of think of that film Bambi when he's walking out on the ice and the feet are going every which way. Yeah, that'll be me today. But at any rate, listen, I've been given only 20 minutes to talk and 10 minutes to listen. I'm much better at talking than listening, according to my wife. But let's see where we can get in 20 minutes. This is somewhat of a basic presentation. It does not mean that I don't want to take your questions. I do. And if you have more specific ones, I'll do the best I can to answer them. I have encountered a number of issues with CRAs through the years, and I know a fair amount, but certainly I'm learning as I go. But we'll start with this. What is redevelopment? Well, in Florida, it is activities following Chapter 163, Part 3, the Redevelopment Act, and it revolves around publicly customized plan funded by tax increment. I'm guessing that most, if not all of you, know what tax increment is, but since I have learned that people in these rooms are at different stages, simply put, increment is the difference between the taxes for the CRA area, your redevelopment area, whatever the boundaries are, in your base year, the year you begin, and how much they increase over the time of your CRA, typically 30 years. So for example, if your base year taxes for the entire CRA were $1 million in property taxes, and the next year they were $1,050,000, the $50 would be your increment. And frankly, that's not too much of a stretch. As you will all know who are doing redevelopment, those first years are pretty lean years. It's the back end years where you actually start to see the benefits of redevelopment because the tax base goes up, and that's how the whole idea works. Why can redevelopment be controversial? Well, some of you will certainly know the answer to this, because you can't change the light bulb in a lot of cities without being controversial. The reality is, the mission is for government to invest public funds into private enterprises. I could stop right there and that would be enough controversy for many people, to increase the tax base. And how do we do that? We're going to talk some about that. And yes, it involves a lot of money locally generated if it works properly. David used to say, he said, if you're not being sued, you're not doing it right. And there's some truth to that. I can certainly tell you we got sued in Maitland. We won, but that's part of the process. As with most municipal issues, The sign bite about controversy can lead to misunderstandings people who don't hear the rest of the story. Because when you put in things like stormwater ponds, not sexy, but necessary for redevelopment, sidewalks widened, some places want brick streets and so forth, they're to attract the business that will ultimately raise the tax base. And you will get, and I'm sure some of you have gotten, why in the world are we doing this for nothing? It's more along the lines, I think the analogy I would make is, if you build it, they will come. If you're familiar with that movie, Field of Dreams, that's the reason. But as it says here, for a limited period of time, to eradicate slum and blight, sustain the quality of life, all ships float with the rising tide. If you raise up the quality of the environment, then you attract the kinds of businesses that you want for your area. That's kind of the idea of this. So you have to have a plan, and you have to have a lot of stick-to-itiveness. In talking about this today, the first question I wanted to ask you all, just to get a sense of, see if you are where my 6 cities are, is, has anybody got any active redevelopment going on right now? God bless you. I want to know more about it. I expected the answer from most of you because there is no money. So you're going to probably, if you had one question for me today, one question I asked myself, and certainly I've had council people say the same thing, is, well, what do we do? How do we fix this? We got vacancy issues, we got places we can't fill, and we really don't know what to do. I'm going to try to provide a few answers on that, but at any rate, I'm not surprised by those of you who don't have anything going on, and I'll throw you a lifeline here in a bit. Okay, what is a redevelopment plan? Well, it's a blueprint. Obviously, it is a blueprint for what you want to see in your redevelopment areas, whatever that may be. But interestingly enough, there are all manner of plans. Obviously, they need to comply with the statute, and I hope you will know what I mean when I say that. But I've seen plans, for example, in Maitland, that have a very detailed set of building standards. It actually works as an overlay district. It has heights that are in addition to the building code and zoning. It has densities. It has incentives for getting extra density or extra height or extra FAR, if you know that floor area ratio, if you provide certain things back to the city, such as contributions to the building of a stormwater pond or installing a device to help make water in a given lake more pure and so forth. So there are incentives built into it. But there are plans that are much more basic and much more broad that just talk about projects in a broad sense and in a general sense, and don't have development standards, but instead rely on the underlying land use development code as their entire plan. Mount Dora is an example of one of those. So there's a lot of differences in there. As long as it meets the statutory requirements, that's all it needs to do. But I would tell you this, a plan, you know, we lawyers here, and I'm sure you guys have heard in your lifetime, the statement that the Constitution is a living, breathing document. I don't actually buy into that theory, but you've heard that before. Having said that, the plan needs to be. It needs to be because, as we've seen in the last few years, times change. Economics change. So when we talk about a plan that addresses unique, customized needs, overall goals, specific projects, incentives, and so forth, it really does need to be, as it says here at the bottom, a living document. So one of the lines I would throw to you now, how many of you have amended your plan in the last 5 years or revisited your plan in the last 5 years? Okay, a fair amount. For those of you who haven't, now's the time. Because what you want to do is the best you can. If you ask me who to bet on as your prognosticator, I'm not going to be able to help you too much on that. But as best you can, prognosticate where growth is going to come and when and how, and be prepared for what works. What works is a critical element of successful redevelopment. There are in many communities, including all of the ones that I represent, grandiose ideas about what they want and what community input tells them they ought to want. And that's great. You'll never hear me say you shouldn't listen to your communities. But if you want successful redevelopment, you have to have your fingers on the pulse of what works economically, or you're doomed to failure. In some communities, this is deemed as an acceptable casualty. If we can't get it exactly the way we want it, then we just won't have it, and that's okay. But you have to understand the dynamic between economics, investing on the side of a development partner, and what the development partner has to get out of it to make it work. And if your vision, which not untypically in many places would be no more than 3 stories, no more than 10 units per acre, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the things that we all like, we love to see, if it doesn't work economically, you're kidding yourself and you're killing your redevelopment. So you need to find out creative ways to solve the puzzle of what works economically, and unlike what you will hear, particularly from candidly elected leaders and from your community, you really need to know the economics. It's not just on the developer to tell you, you need to know, okay? We've talked about tax increment financing and where it comes from, that difference between your base level tax year and the rising tide of increased property values as redevelopment starts to take hold. You're allowed to get up to 95% of that increment by statute. It can be limited, and some of your CRAs, I'm sure, is limited to some number less than that by statute. That's a possibility that you could be working under. But basically, the county and city write you a check annually, and previously, what I said before, it can be loaned, earmarked, bonded, it's leveraging. That would have been really true about 2 years ago. Today, anybody been bonding any TIF recently? Yeah, it's not a good market to try to do that. It's also not a good market to try to do CDD bonds, because CDDs are going to be, I think, a real permanent casualty, at least as we ever used to know them here, community development districts in Florida of the downturn in the economy. But having said that, TIF bonds I'm more optimistic about. I think that they will eventually recover. TIF bonds, bonds that are floated on the promise of increased tax revenue that creates a revenue stream that will allow you to pay back those bonds over time. When the bond market comes back, I think those will be some of the first to recover. But whether that's going to be 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years from now, God is my only witness. I have no clue. I just hope it's sooner rather than later. But that's the reality, and that's what happens. We're going to talk a little bit about what do you do in the interim with your money, since you can't bond it right now. Okay, so what is the reality? Why does it still look the same? Well, we've talked about that, because redevelopment in particular is a slow process. It does not take place overnight. It requires vision to invest in the little things that lead to the bigger things. And it usually requires some kind of foothold in the door, if you will, of the area you want to turn around or reverse a trend in, to say, look at that success and watch it grow from there. How many of you have been recently to the community of Winter Garden? Okay, I know Mayor DeMarco, and I see some other hands. To me, Winter Garden is a great example of what can happen if you're able to maintain a vision. Now, when I talk about Winter Garden, I don't want to pretend to know more than I know. I do not know whether they are flush with cash. What I know is the same thing citizens know when they go through there. They've taken a place that was a mess and turned it into a pretty place. So even if today, and some of you may say, oh, well, this guy's nuts because they're hurting. I don't know. What I can tell you is that when the economy turns, that is a place that you'd want to go, because they have the brick streets, they have a beautiful fountain, they have widened sidewalks, they put in a new city hall that's down there that's an attractant. They've got the kind of business storefront similar to Mount Dora that we like to see and that a lot of communities like to see. That is an example of, to me, what successful redevelopment can and should be. And over the long term, I think will prove to be a great success for the people who live there.